Hey guys, Josh Muzakis here. Last week I was finally able to take delivery of my very own Stark Varg. It's been a long 2-year wait. I know a lot of people have been waiting. There's been tons of delays, but a lot of bikes are starting to make it to customers now, and I was finally able to get mine. Super excited to have this bike. And I just wanted to do a quick review video based on the first ride and getting into some of the things that I noticed and felt, just as a quick initial review out in the trails. And I'm planning to follow this up next week with a review on the motocross track, so I can kind of give a wide range of use cases and what my initial feelings and thoughts were on the bike. I think it's important to keep in mind that this is just a quick initial review based on one day on the bike. Components are going to break in, things are going to change a little bit over time as I get more used to the bike and kind of get a general better sense of what it's doing and what's going on. Obviously this is very different than any gas motorcycle, so these are just my initial thoughts, nothing crazy set in stone, but just wanted to give a quick review. So some of you may remember that I was lucky enough to travel to Barcelona, Spain earlier this year to do an initial demo on the bike, and I had posted a YouTube video with my thoughts from that trip previously, so you can go back and check that out. But today was actually my first time riding the bike on trails or anything really other than a motocross track. So that was a little bit of a different experience, and with it being a brand new bike. So the first thing I noticed was that I felt the weight of the bike a lot more on the trail than I did on the track initially. It's not a huge hindrance, but you do notice the weight on kind of the tighter single track trails where you're moving slow and you're really having to kind of maneuver the bike a lot left and right and lean it over. It's a little harder to do than the 2-stroke gas bike that I would normally ride in the woods like this. And it required a little bit of a different technique. So it's really important on this bike to make sure you're using your legs and not your arms to maneuver the bike. If you use your arms only, you're going to get tired really quickly. But if you use your legs effectively and really leverage the pegs in order to move the bike left and right and lean left and right, that'll alleviate a lot of that quickly. So that was the first thing I noticed, and one of the adjustments that I had to make to my technique was to make sure that I was using my legs effectively, which you really should be doing anyways. One of the positive things that I noticed right away was not having to shift or cover the clutch was a huge benefit on the trail. This was a benefit on the track as well, but on the trail it really becomes apparent how big of an advantage this is. Just not having to take up the mental capacity of having to constantly cover the clutch and make sure you're in the right gear while you're trying to dodge branches and rocks and roots and make sure you're staying in an optimal line. It just kind of frees up brain capacity to focus on line selection and technique and things like that. Probably the most interesting thing that I discovered throughout the day was that I actually ended up having to run the bike in a higher power setting than I did previously on the motocross track. So some of you might recall when I first tested the bike in Spain, I tended to keep the bike around 55 horsepower on the track. That seemed to be pretty optimal for me, to where it had enough power, and it wasn't tiring me out, and I also wasn't having to think so much about modulating the power that I ended up going slower. So 55 seemed to be pretty optimal for me on that track. Out here on the trail, I ended up keeping the bike between 60 and 70, and the main reason for that was just to get the bottom end power that I needed to lift the front wheel easily over rocks and logs and things like that. In the lower power settings, the bike tends to lag a little bit on the bottom end, and you don't have that clutch to give you the quick burst of power. So it ended up being easier for me to actually bump the power up a little bit in order to get that torque range that I liked and be able to actually keep the front end light. Now, obviously this comes with a little bit of a trade-off because you need to be careful with how much throttle you're applying, but I didn't really seem to have a huge problem with the rear wheel braking traction in loose areas. I was able to modulate the power pretty easily still because the controller's really intuitive to the rider, but I'm hoping in subsequent software updates for the phone and the app that they'll give us the ability to adjust acceleration as well as power, because on the trail it would be nice to have kind of an optimal setting of maybe 50 horsepower, 40 horsepower or so, would be able to turn that acceleration or torque setting up to be able to get that initial hit that you want, to be able to keep the front end light. Moving on to the tires on this bike, an interesting thing that I noticed was that I needed to run higher tire pressure than I normally would. So normally if I was out here on my YZ250, I'd probably run 13.5 PSI in the front tire or something like that. And on the Varg, I ended up having to run 15, 16 or so. And that was mainly because I felt like I was blowing through the tire a little bit too easy, and the tire was rolling over. I don't know if that was due to the weight of the bike or the fact that it comes with Pirelli stock. I don't have any experience with those tires prior. But that was something that I had to adjust to and do a little bit differently on my initial setup, and hopefully something I'll be able to explore a little bit in subsequent test days and see if I can kind of get a read on what's happening or being able to dial in optimal pressure. As far as suspension is concerned, I don't want to get too much into it because every new bike or new suspension set is going to have a break-in period, probably of at least 2 hours or so, and we maybe got an hour, hour and a half or so of riding in. So overall, it did feel good. I was able to kind of soften it a little bit for the trail, and it felt plush, and I really didn't have any major complaints. But I don't think it's fair to assess suspension this early on, so I'm going to wait for subsequent videos to really dive into that. Now, the big question that's on everybody's mind is battery life. I was actually very surprised at how good the battery life was. We ended up doing 22 miles of relatively tight single track, nothing too wide open or anything, a little bit of time spent on fire roads in between trails, but we were able to do 22 miles on 50% battery. So I would feel very comfortable doing a 40-mile ride on this bike, which is longer than most guys are going to go on a regular day up at the trails in the mountains. I really didn't have a good sense for what battery life was going to be going into the ride today, but I was really pleasantly surprised to see that we were able to get that much range out of the bike. That's a very, very reassuring thing, that we're going to get pretty optimal battery life that should cover a pretty wide range of riders. Another interesting note on battery life, power setting didn't really seem to have a major effect on range. So there were 4 of us out there today on Vargs, and we were all at various power ranges. I was running mine 60 to 70 horsepower. Some of my buddies were running theirs at 40 to 50 horsepower, and at the end of the ride, we were all within a few percent battery life of each other, which was really surprising to me. I guess it does make sense when you think about it. We're not doing any really wide open riding. This isn't desert riding or anything. We're relatively low speed, but I was still surprised to see after 22 miles of riding that we were still within a few percentage points of each other on battery life, regardless of the power setting we were using. So that's pretty much it for my initial thoughts on the bike. We had a ton of fun on them today out on the trails. It was a great day to go cruise around, break in the bikes a little bit, and so far I could not be happier with this bike. The way it rode, the quality of the components, just everything about it has been just awesome. Looking forward to testing it on the track, hopefully this next weekend, and I'll be sure to make a review video from that and try to kind of make subsequent videos showing how the bike's holding up and some of the things I discover with tuning as I go along, and try to kind of dial the bike in for me. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. If you have any specific questions about the bike, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. Keep in mind that this is my first review based on one day on the bike. I don't think it'd be wise to draw any hard conclusions from what I've said today. Things may change over time as the bike breaks in and as I get more comfortable on it. So I'll continue to keep you guys updated in subsequent videos as I get more time and knowledge about the bike.